Welcome to SS2 Literature in English. Today we place African literature in its historical context, understanding the historical, political, and cultural forces that shape the themes and styles of African writing. Literature does not exist in a vacuum, it responds to the realities of the time and place in which it was written. African literature in English is particularly shaped by colonialism, independence, and the post-colonial experience. Understanding this context helps you interpret literary texts more deeply and write better WAEC answers. From the 15th century onwards, European powers colonized large parts of Africa. Portugal, West and Central Africa, slave trade ports. Britain, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Uganda, Zimbabwe and others. France, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Mali and others. Germany, parts of East and West Africa. Colonialism involved. Territorial control, military conquest, establishment of colonial administration. Economic exploitation, extraction of resources, palm oil, cocoa, rubber, minerals, crude oil. Cultural imposition, Western education, Christianity, English/French language, dismissal of African cultures and values. The civilizing mission, colonial ideology claiming that Europeans brought civilization to primitive Africa, deeply racist justification for exploitation. The British colonialists introduced English language education in Nigeria, and this ultimately gave rise to Nigeria/S remarkable literary tradition in English. Early phases of African literature. 1. Oral tradition. Before colonialism, African literature was primarily oral, folktales, proverbs, praise songs, oriki/ajola/egu, epics, riddles. These traditions remain vibrant and continue to influence written literature. 2. Early colonial period writing, late 19th, early 20th century. African writers began writing in English under colonial education. Themes: adjusting to colonial rule, preserving African identity, Christian conversion experiences. Example: Amos Tutwola / The Palm Wine Drinkard, 1952, drew heavily on Yoruba oral tradition. 3. The Negritude movement, 1930s to 1960s. Francophone African and Caribbean intellectuals, Yam Césaire, Léopold Sédar Senghor. Celebrated African culture, heritage, and identity in response to French colonial assimilation. In English, this parallels the Harlem Renaissance in the USA, African American cultural pride. The period around independence, Nigeria, 1960, produced Africa/S greatest literary works. Chinua Achebe, Nigeria Things Fall Apart, 1958, the landmark novel, responds directly to European misrepresentations of Africa, especially Joseph Conrad Bach's Heart of Darkness, tells the story of colonialism from an African perspective. Wole Soyinka, Nigeria Nobel laureate 1986, plays, poems, essays, blends Yoruba mythology with Western dramatic traditions, Death and the King /S Horsemen, A Dance of the Forest. J.P. Clark, Nigeria Poetry, playwright. Christopher Okigbo, Nigeria Modernist Poetry, Labyrinths, Complex, Multi-layered verse. Ngugi W.A. Thion /O, Kenya novels examining colonialism and its aftermath, Weep Not Child, A Grain of Wheat, later wrote in Gikuyu as a political act against English. Amos Tutwola, Nigeria The Palm Wine Drinkard, uniquely Nigerian blend of Yoruba oral tradition and English. Recurring themes in African literature. 1. Colonialism and its impact, the disruption of pre-colonial life, cultural erosion, psychological damage. 2. Tradition versus modernity, tensions between African customs and Western ways. 3. Identity, who am I as an African? Reclaiming African identity, pride in heritage. 4. Political independence and disillusionment, initial euphoria of independence, corruption, military coups, and betrayal of nationalist dreams. 5. Social inequality, class divisions, wealth gap, exploitation of the poor. 6. Gender and Women /S Roles, Feminist Voices Challenging Patriarchal Structures, Bochy Emekita, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. 7. The City versus the Village, Migration to Cities, Loss of Community, Urban Alienation. 8. Language and Identity, The Question of Writing in English versus African Languages, Ngugi /S Debate. Contemporary African Literature, 21st Century. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Nigeria Purple Hibiscus, Half of a Yellow Sun, Biafra War, Americano, We Should All Be Feminist, The Danger of a Single Story. Ben Okea, Nigeria The Famished Road, Booker Prize 1991, Spirit Child, Obiku, Mythology. Helen Habila, Nigeria Waiting for an Angel, Journalism, Military Rule, Lagos. Sefi Atta, Nigeria Everything Good Will Come. Teju Cole, Nigeria Open City, Identity, Migration, Memory. Adeyabi Trisha Noboni, I Do Not Come to You by Chance. Diaspora Voices, many contemporary Nigerian writers live between Nigeria and the West. Their work explores identity in globalized, multicultural contexts. Summary of African Literature, Historical Context. Oral tradition, folktales, proverbs, praise songs, epics, the foundation of African literature. Colonialism, British rule from 1860s, 1960, imposed English education, Christianity, resource extraction. Literary Renaissance, Things Fall Apart, Achebe, 1958, landmark response to colonial narratives. Key writers, Achebe, Soyinka, Nobel 1986, Okigbo, Clark, Tutwola, Ngugi wa Thiong'o /O. Themes, colonialism, tradition versus modernity, identity, political disillusionment, gender, city versus village. Contemporary, Adichie, Okri, Habila, Atta, Co. Key concept, literature responds to historical and political context. You cannot fully understand the text without knowing its context.